I'm in a
Hi
very
everyone.
empty hotel room, so my apologies for the background.
Hi everyone. We start the session, the last session of the Social Innovation and Global Ethics Forum. This session about creating an eco-friendly and inclusion and inclusive future in a post-COVID-19 world. This session is a paramount one dealing with the aspect of climate change, how to combat it, how to be able as a society, as a humanity, being able, like to curb what seems to be, like inevitable. We have, like the power of innovations, we have the power of creativity, we have talents, we have thought leaders, and some of them are with us today to share their vision. And so this is the moment of truth that is, getting closer and closer. The sooner we wait, the more challenging will be the situation. Already, millions of people around the world are affected by the direct or side effects of global warming. So, this is a tremendous opportunity for the world to choose the right path, the right journey after such a challenge humanity has faced commonly with COVID 19. So, let me introduce first our different panelists and speakers. And I will start with Diala Benke. So, Diala, thank you for joining us from Amsterdam. Diala is an engineer, an ex-McKinsey consultant based in Amsterdam, and she has more than 15 years of exploration into the energy sector, and she is as well very much involved into a different range of organization in sustainability or digital transformations in their different aspects. She will be, like bringing to us both the aspect of expertise and how she is seeing, like the potential bridge where energy can be connected to new ways, new approach to both be able, like to face our daily needs from a consumption basis as humanity, but at the same time make the right choice to make it more sustainable and more inclusive. Then we will have, like the pleasure to have Dr. Simon joining us. So Simon, it's a pleasure to have you. We already met years ago, like in 2018 for the CGF Singapore. You are a writer. You have been very strongly involved into sustainable innovation in your different, consulting, but as well, with the different startup that you are now leading as a co-founder and chief strategy officer for Endprint, an impact as a service platform that helps companies grow with the planet by integrating and automating regeneration into their daily lives. So this is very significant. And at the same time, you co-founded the Global Mangrove Trust, which is a non-profit as well, supportive of climate initiatives differently. So we will go into more of the details about that. Isan, you are, I would say, the banker. You are the investment banker of the panel. You have been working in that field for over 30 years, and you have, like delivered your expertise across different jurisdictions from San Francisco to Tokyo, passing to New York and Asia and Middle East. And so you are at the moment involved into a very landmark project, which is, like as well our innovative partner today, which is a project led by Mr. Dikembe Motumbo, and that's United Carbon Citizens Project, whose aim is to be able to build a sustainable way to invest into protection of forests and initiatives that are related to building, like curbing carbon emission generation, and at the same time being able to fuel the aspect of carbon credit to motivate and incentivize stakeholders to encourage investment with a sustainable aspect. So let's get started. Diala, first of all, what is the reason and inspiration that brought you into bringing into energy the aspect and dimension of sustainability?
Sure. Thanks very much for having me today. I think it's a very complex question, and you can answer it a million different ways. I've come from the vantage point of having seen the big oil industry and seeing all of the different drivers that we need to overcome to be able to actually propel us into the future and actually have a more sustainable balance of energy. What I have seen and what drives me to be here today, to be honest with you, is that it's not as black and white as what I think a lot of the public perceive. There is a lot of goodwill, I think, for most stakeholders in the energy transition. I think the biggest problems, if I am to be honest, is there's a lack of urgency. There's a lot of intent, but there seems to be a lack of urgency when it comes to actually putting into place real action plans, especially on the corporate front. What I've seen is that unless there is a firm mandate, either by local legislation or by some sort of key stakeholder, that these sort of actions are not being made concrete at a rate enough, fast enough for us to actually reach our ambitions. Progress is being made, but I think if I was to say what is the biggest thing that we can do to put us back on track, because at the moment, I mean, the latest projections that I've seen is that we're probably more on track for a 3.5 degree pathway rather than 1.5. I think the biggest thing that I would say is we need to actually challenge our shareholders, because there's this common misperception that corporations are the ones that wield all the power. And yet at the end of the day, I've actually seen firsthand that they are also trying to balance their own stakeholders. And sometimes the C-suite, they are all in favor of making more stricter, more serious moves and actions. However, they'll get pushback from shareholders, from shareholder expectations. If we want the yields and the returns that come with traditional projects, and that come with oil and gas, or that come with other alternative investments, how can we create a world in which we actually choose to invest in other sources which may not ever be as profitable as the former ones? I think that is a real challenge. That requires a mindset shift. Are we willing to accept that compromise? Because I do think at this stage, it's still foreseen as a compromise. And that's probably, I would say, a summary of how I see it at the moment. And I'm sure the others on the line probably might have some feelings to share on this.
Thank you, Diala. Thank you very much. Simon, you are the researcher, the academic, and now the entrepreneur as well. So where and when did it started? I can for sure guarantee it started, before, 2018, because that's when we met and you were already, like quite motivated. So what and where did it happen? And what is, like the vision behind it?
Gosh, I think for me, I mean, I've been interested in this space for a long time. I wrote my first dissertation when I was like a young student on what if the model of capitalism would be replaced by a Buddhist model where the only goal would be the alleviation of all suffering for all species on Earth, right? So I've been a weirdo from the start, but I think what really inspired me to get into the environmental space was a TED talk from William McDonough, an architect and as he says, the discoverer of cradle to cradle, not necessarily the inventor, but so the beginning of the cradle to cradle and then the circular economy really kind of dates back to 2004, 2005 when William McDonough and his co-founder Michael Braungart started thinking about this. And the moment I saw that 20-minute TED talk, I was convinced that, okay, this is what I'm going to have to spend the rest of my life on. So, and I still watch it every year, just to remind myself about what we're trying to preserve and what we're trying to do. so that's how I got started. And then I took a long detour, becoming an academic and doing a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with sustainability, focusing more on innovation, and then got dragged back into entrepreneurship since 2017. And that the trigger for that was we were visiting. So my co-founder and I were visiting a mangrove project in Myanmar, and we spent a couple of I think 6 days roaming around the forests, working with the local communities. And we were there because we were interested in the financing problems, a bit like Diala was highlighting. So from the shareholder perspective, but we were looking at this more from how come these projects that are so important for the world, that have such incredible ecosystem value, that absorb so much carbon, how come they don't get funded? And so we did a lot of work in that space, wrote a report for the UN on this topic. And one of our key findings was that up to 80% of the money that companies these days spend on carbon credits, which is a big part, probably too big a part right now of the whole decarbonization narrative. But up to 80% of the money that is being spent on this is not going to local communities, doesn't put any trees in the ground, doesn't do anything to remove carbon. And that's a massive problem. All that money goes to intermediaries, sellers, resellers, validators, auditors, all of these additional functions, which have something to do in that space. But that really creates a massive misappropriation of funding, I think. And so for me, this is really what triggered my own entrepreneurial start, initially with Global Mangrove Trust, and then 2 years later in 2019 with Handprint.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much to raise that aspect of not only the source of your inspiration. It would be nice that you share us the link of the TED Talk you mentioned. That is for us to share with our audience. But as well, raising the flag on the fact that there is a very significant disparity between the amount of wealth funds that is mobilized, but at the same time the lower aspect of how it is benefiting on the ground projects that are having a real impact to curb global warming. So this is a very good transition to Ihsan. Ihsan, so I would like to know first of all, because you have been a kind of the M&A expert in that field for several decades. So you have seen, this evolution in the sectors. What is the inspiration and reason that is bringing you now to be one of the top senior advisor of this leading, initiatives with United, Carbon Citizens? And how are you, thinking these initiatives could be, bringing something very concrete to make sure that when people want to invest into that aspect and priority, this really benefits projects at a local level on the ground? You have to unmute yourself, Ihsan.
Well, one saying that I think it does have a lot of truth, if you believe that it takes a team and not just a collection of egos. Leadership stands on the shoulders of others, and I came to this kind of by accident. I started my work life in the early 80s, so that gives you a sense of how old I might be. And initially it was banking, then it was more strategic advice and consulting. That was what brought me out to California. I worked a fair amount with technology firms, hardware, software, medical. And when we had a financial crash in the period of around 2000, that left me thinking about some other things to do. And I was actually dragged back to my earlier world of investment banking, largely to look at energy and how that was growing in the world post-Enron. You might remember the great deregulation of the energy markets, which was good for entrepreneurship. It wasn't always good for the consumer, but it was an interesting period because a lot of new blood, new ideas came into the energy space, both in banking and utilities and elsewhere. And this was an international phenomenon too. Europe, in a way, was actually much further ahead than the United States. And I learned about this thing called the global carbon crediting world that had gotten started in the late 90s. One of my partners was his firm was responsible for the very first registered carbon credit project for forestry, and I believe that was in Brazil. And equally, there was something happening in Europe called the European Emissions Trading Scheme. And Diallo, to your point, that was the first time that there was a big regulatory remit to say, okay, you 600 or 800 large industrial emitters across the European Union, we'd like you to take responsibility for how you are actually emitting carbon in the atmosphere, and we'll give you a program of activities where you can not only have a carbon signal to reduce the emissions that you do in your day-to-day activities, changing over from coal to natural gas and eventually to renewables, for instance, but also you can bring in projects that, based on a business as usual yardstick, you can say that at least some of your emissions can be offset by doing good elsewhere, primarily in developing countries, countries in transition. And that's how you get countries like Africa, Brazil, countries in transition, how you get their projects set on the ground to be brought in as one way to help defease your carbon obligation in that regulatory system. That was mid 2000s. And then fast forward, and then I should say that within that period of time is when I met my business co-founders, one of whom is Mark Stewart, who I would have to say, stands heads and shoulders above me in terms of being the old guy in that space, because he and his partner Pedro Moracosta were the ones who registered that first forestry project in the late 90s and built a portfolio that consisted of almost 1,000 projects, depending on how you count it, globally across 14 time zones. And that portfolio was bought by JP Morgan in the 2009-2010 timeframe, at which point Mark broke out on his own, and we started Allotrope Partners, where we directly invest in both project activities, some venture capital work, and we have a pretty active advisory practice where we're helping to spread the word among corporates doing business primarily in Southeast Asia and parts of Latin America, to have all the implementation tools and incentives to transfer over to cleaner energy sources, clean their supply chains and whatnot. So that's our mix of activities. And then because of that work and the history is how we as a company got introduced to Dikembe and to Wade. And we've been very excited to help launch United Carbon Citizens. And I think I can turn that over to Wade, but we're looking forward to some very impactful investments and announcements that we can make over the coming months.
Thank you, Isan. It's as I say, like you made, the roller coaster of finance, to end up, like in the best division of it, which is the impact, investing, and the impact finance that impact people. So I think a side question: that are you feeling much better on that, or you at the human level? Do you enjoy much more? Do you see like how your talent is contributing? Like with great aspirations to see the impact?
I mean, it goes in waves. There was a lot of excitement in the mid OOs. There was a little bit of a downturn with there was a little bit of lost momentum starting around 2009, 2010. People thought that the Copenhagen Agreement, because part of working in global carbon is the fatigue of following what happens every year with the UN process and the Conference of the Parties. And to Diallo's point, sometimes it doesn't feel like there's enough urgency. Behind the scenes, there actually is. There's so many NGOs who are very active as community partners. There's a lot of business associations, which some slow things down. Some are actually pretty good at saying, well, we know that we're facing this kind of future, and we're seeing where the ball is going, and some are more progressive than others. But it's a lot of voices in the room, and that never is good for speed.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you very much. Wade, we are happy to see you back and staying with us. That's good. So Wade, you are the serial, entrepreneur. You are, like the entrepreneur, what I say, of the future, because you had, invested in many, like different ventures on energy, oil and gas, mining, corporation on different, areas, and particularly in Africa. And at the same time, you are a philanthropist. You understand the importance of sustainability, and you are a key stakeholders into the United Carbon Credit, initiatives with the Global Carbon Citizen initiative that you are, encouraging. So, where is the inspiration coming from? What has been the triggers to integrate the aspect of sustainability as a very tremendous priority in your business approach and in your investment, ventures?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And sorry for kind of the in and out. For some reason, I was just having some technical issues where when I got into the room, the voices were kind of muddled, so I had to click in and out a few times. But thank you, and I'm glad I could join. Ethan had went through, some of the larger picture initiatives that they do as Allotrope, who are senior advisors to us. But I'll kind of start a little bit of my history. I've been working in Africa now, working and living in Africa now for 33 years. And I kind of started from the total opposite side of sustainability, where I was in the fossil fuel business in the oil industry. And two things really happened, I think, when I moved from Canada to Africa. Is important things. Is my eyes were really open to community development and working with indigenous groups and companies, and that's really how I entered into Africa. Was actually through partnerships with local indigenous companies who were allocated rights to drill, explore, and produce oil and gas fields. These were predominantly large business families that really didn't know anything about the oil industry, and it was an initiative of the government of Nigeria to introduce an independent industry by promoting indigenous participation as opposed to dominance by Mobil, Shell, Chevron, the large 5 major oil companies that were present in Nigeria for many years. So I was very fortunate to get in early in the indigenization aspect of the oil industry in Nigeria. And what it did is it opened my eyes to basically working with indigenous groups, not just at the professional level in our head offices, but also at the community levels. And really right from the onset of our activities, we worked very closely with indigenous communities. So where we were developing our assets, we relied very heavily on communities and did a lot of community employment, community training, and then started doing a lot of social development activities, drilling water wells. We would have excess power generation from generators we'd have for our activities, and we'd put that into mini grids into communities nearby our activities. So really, strong initiatives of social development, and that really is a win-win for us and for the communities, and safeguards a lot of your assets too, because the livelihood of those communities where you're working is really us now. They don't really benefit a lot from federal government or state government, because a lot of the income that governments make from extractive industries, natural resource industries like oil and mining, never filter down to the communities. So that really opened our eyes to doing social development programs. And then what we saw was significant amount of environmental damage that was caused by the major oil companies in the Niger Delta. And right from the onset, we had a total different approach of environmental protection programs. I would say using more standards from North America. Although these large major oil companies come from North America, they come from Europe, they didn't really practice the same standards in African countries as they do back in their home countries. And it's quite shocking to see some of the damage that was done. But once again, a lot of the causes were, they were more focused on profitability as opposed to working with the communities, protecting the environments. We then transitioned into doing a lot of capturing of our natural gas. So with oil production, you have a lot of associated natural gas. And then we turn that into a commodity as opposed to flaring the gas. Nigeria is one of the largest associated gas flaring countries and significant CO2 emitter from that associated natural gas in the world. What we did is we captured our gas and all of our developments, put them into extraction processes where you could strip out the LPGs, propanes, butanes. That propane is then used for local domestic gas markets. A lot of it can be used for displacing wood burning cook stoves with gas cook stoves. And then the natural gas was put into power generators and then put back into the grid, or used for powering our infrastructure where we had our activities, our drilling activities, our production facilities, and also local communities. So it's an initiative now that we've been doing kind of on a small scale, but now let's say with the, let's say global awareness of the significant impact that emissions are having on climate change, we're going to take it to a much higher level and a much higher scale, where we're going to go to third parties, government, participating equity interests, and do very large scale gas capture, where we extract the liquids, the LPGs, propanes, do large cook stove initiatives. Natural gas, put what gas we can into power generation, because there is a lack of infrastructure as far as the grid within the country. And then we're looking at other methodologies to monetize the gas and to help reduce significant emissions on two fronts: the natural gas, associated gas emissions, and also one of the projects we're looking into is producing methanol from the natural gas. And as you may be aware, there's a significant movement now with a lot of the large international shipping companies to convert from diesel fuel powering their large ships to using a more clean burning methanol. So it's a very interesting integrated project where we can extract, reduce the gas flares, produce LPGs which can be used to help displace wood burn cook stoves, which helps to reduce deforestation, and then electricity, and then now the third aspect could be the methanol production. One of the other things that we've done on the continent of Africa is migrated, like the world trends, from fossil fuel petroleum to power cars into electrical batteries and electric cars. So we focus on battery metals. So we're working on some projects where we are looking at developing in a sustainable manner nickel projects on the continent. And as you know, nickel is a very large component in electric car batteries. And once again, working very closely with indigenous communities and doing a lot of social development within those communities, where we would be actively developing nickel resources. The other thing in Nigeria that we are working on now and talking to two of the larger state governments and communities is doing some forest protection. So in the Niger Delta, where most of the oil and gas production is, it's in a very delicate ecosystem of mangroves. There's a lot of river systems and mangrove systems in the Delta. And unfortunately, there's been significant destruction due to the oil industry, where there's been a lot of pipelines get broken into, pipelines break, they get ignored by a lot of the operators that control those pipelines, and there's significant damage and degradation to those mangroves in the Delta. So one of our initiatives, in addition to capturing the gas flares, will be to work with the state governments and local communities to work on remediation treatment, clean up a lot of the oil spills. There's also a lot of reforestation that can be done, where there was either a lot of pipelines that were run through those mangroves or seismic lines that were shot for oil exploration activities. So it's something that we're working on now, working closely with state governments and some of the local communities, especially in Bielsa State, where a large part of the mangroves in Nigeria are located that do have a lot of damage from the oil industry. How I got actively involved and had the vision with our chairman, Mr. Dikembe Mutombo, to create United Carbon Citizens was through his foundation, where Dikembe's been doing a lot of social development programs on the continent, especially in his home country of DRC Congo, where he's built significant healthcare facilities. He's built schools, and now he's has a huge initiatives where he's building a university. And it was just through many years of ourselves both doing similar social development programs, us in Nigeria and him and his group in Congo and to some extent in Angola, where we started working together on the initiatives through his foundation. And then we already had the tools to develop natural resources, if it be oil or mining. So we viewed developing carbon credits as just another sector of a business that we already understand. We know how to work in Africa. We have significant relationships in Africa, good relationships with communities. So it was a logical transition for us to migrate more into carbon credit development programs, do what we can do on sustainability, on all of our natural resource programs. And it really takes people like us, I think, to open the eyeballs of other large corporations and independents that are in the extractive industries and the natural resource industries that, hey, there is another commodity, which is generation and development of carbon credits. And that's really what we've been doing in the continent of Africa. And then we're taking our business model now into Latin America. We've been working on some reforestation programs in the Amazon. I was recently in Brazil for about 3 weeks. And working, though, like we do in Africa, we work with local indigenous communities. Start off by doing social development programs, and then work on the most appropriate manner to fund and develop projects that have meaningful impact by reforestation, or in areas that have active deforestation. We can work with communities to help stop that deforestation, but do it in a manner where we have, significant input from professional bodies like Ethan and Mark from Allotrope. One of the other groups we work with is Carbon Capital Advisors, Mike Brown and Joe, who are very senior in the carbon space as well, like Mark and Ethan. They have a lot of experience worldwide on policy, and what we do is we create and develop our programs that all are done in a very professional and appropriate manner. Work with third parties such as Vera, where Ethan's partner and founding member of Allotrope is actually on the board of Vera for many years. So we're kind of, there's kind of unfortunately there's kind of a group of other developers out there. We call them the carbon cowboys, who really are out there developing credits, or what they so-called call credits, and probably misrepresenting that they really do have a valid credit when they don't. And unfortunately, there's people that will buy that credits when it's not really doing any good for anybody. As Simon mentioned, there's a lot of misrepresentation on what is a verifiable and true impactful development program. So we make sure we have the right people, the right advisors, and work with every agency we can to give it the highest credibility and generate the highest standards of carbon credits we can, that have a lot of co-benefits. We're very, very, very focused on co-benefits on our programs, such as social carbon and biodiversification, etc.
Wait, thank you Thank you so much for sharing, like all, like the journey, where it come from, what you are doing. I think, Simon, you are, like involved, like into a platform, very advanced platform on carbon credit. You wanted maybe to react just on what Wade was saying.
Yeah, I wanted to make two short points. One was that I don't know whether the audience has the same reaction that I still have when I hear like someone like Wade talk, and especially when you're talking in the beginning, like there is a perversion that the oil companies are destroying the mangroves in that example, and now they're going to fix it, and then they're going to be rewarded for it by creating carbon credits, and they're going to get paid for it. Right? And so there is this natural tendency to be against this, right? It's like, oh, this is not how it should be. And despite that natural urge that I still have when I hear that, we have to stop thinking like this. Like, we are not going to fix anything without the involvement of the oil companies and the energy majors. And the whole idea of footprinting is really anchored in this association of environmental guilt that needs to be compensated somehow. It just doesn't matter. Like, we are in a state in the world now where we can't be focused on assigning blame anymore. The only thing we have to focus on is solutions. And so what is happening is fantastic, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's Shell or another oil company that is going to become rich from these things, if it prevents genocide, right? Because that's what we're facing. Right? Yeah. So, and I think this is one important thing. The other thing that I think is really interesting is like all of the co-benefits and the high quality of carbon credits. I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. Like we've been doing a lot of work in this space, looking at the incumbent certification agencies, like the big ones like Verra, VCS, Red Plus, Gold Standards. I have a lot of questions. Like, from a scientific perspective, what is happening in those carbon crediting schemes is dated. That is the best way of saying this, right? So what we have been working on together with Oxford University is a new carbon certification protocol that is based on digital technology. It's based on remote sensing that uses more than 50 different machine learning models in order to create accurate estimates of the state of the forest and the carbon stock in that forest above and below ground. And when we are working now with some of the big reforestation groups in Indonesia and soon hopefully also in Sierra Leone, closer to where you're working with, what we are learning from those groups that have been working with these with many of the existing systems for a long time is that what we ask them to do in terms of ground truthing, in terms of going into the forest and measuring what's actually happening, they are baffled. They're like, oh, we've never done this. We've never gone further than, for mangroves, 15 meters into a mangrove forest because it's very hard to navigate. We've never gone. And so there's a lot of problems with the existing methodologies. And that doesn't mean we have to throw all of that away and that all of these carbon credits are not valid. But it does mean, I think, importantly, that I think, and I mean, Ethan said you were closely involved in the beginning, that if we, with the knowledge we have right now, right, if we could go back to the Kyoto Protocol, we would not create carbon credits. We would not create carbon credits as a way of kind of offsetting your own emissions, and we would not create this kind of system that truly incentivizes deforestation. Because you deforest an entire area, then you say, oh, we're really sorry, now let's plant new trees and we're going to get carbon credits. It's very hard to get the same kind of carbon credits for conservation projects. They're considered to be less valuable. So there's a lot of problems with the existing system that need to be challenged by people, by governments, by innovators, by entrepreneurs, and also by companies, right? So I think this is like the 2 points that I wanted to make. I'm sure the others have something to say as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Simon. And Isan, maybe you want to just answer to Simon, and I would like as well Diala to share insight as well on all of this.
Like, all throughout this, you've had to have waves of innovation to make this all make sense. Interestingly, VCS, which was originally called the Voluntary Carbon Standard, did come into being mostly because the UN was hopelessly slow and not innovative with how it was doing baseline measurements for what was truly additional or not. And you could have a whole conference for days and days to talk about what are good additionality measurements versus bad ones. And interesting now with VCS having become it became the verified carbon standard, VCSA, and then more recently was rebranded Vera. They are the juggernaut. You're absolutely right. They dwarf the size of what's happening with gold standard and elsewhere, just because the sheer network that they've built. It doesn't hurt that they're in DC, close to all the NGOs, but what they have is really a tiger by the tail. And I can tell you, they are working on every last way of understanding how they can, integrate these new technologies. Way too many people are talking about crypto for carbon credits, and that could be its own conference. But the fact is, there are increasingly new levels of quality that people are recognizing, and the demand side, whether this is coming from the ESG mandates of companies or just some companies who are relatively further ahead of their peers in their industry. So Shell and BP have always been the leaders versus ExxonMobil and some others just being a little bit slower, and they just want their carbon price and kind of they're happy with that, and they'll follow what the more internationalist companies do. But going to a world that you're more active in right now, so mangroves, as a for instance, is a high visibility, charismatic type of carbon project that people understand has that much more sequestration potential, and as a result, you have levels of carbon, and that one is called blue carbon, and it will get the attention. And with these technologies, and I'm familiar with some of the initiatives at Oxford. I'm not as familiar with the one you just talked about. So they will make a difference and take a greater part in this. And whether it's taking Vera and having a large restructuring of the way historic measures have been done, and come up with better measures of additionality is what happens. There will be this next wave, because interestingly enough, and this goes back to a point that Diallo was making, the tail wagging the dog right now with how companies and investors are going to see true carbon reductions, whether it's carbon removals or other ways that these projects get financed. The voluntary market has become the de facto regulatory market on a global basis, because if you look at how many markets are out there that are truly driven by a regulatory mandate, you've got a patchwork of things in Canada. You've got California with its own, it's been going its own way since about 2006 when it passed a bill called AB 32. And the European Union is now a 20-year-old scheme with what they have there. So if you're talking about pledges that have been made under Article 6 of the Paris COP, and I'm sure you've all studied that at different levels, part of the what one country can trade to versus another country is going to come through things like the voluntary market, and not a commitment that's been done in the European Union emissions trading scheme. So it's all a long way of saying stay tuned. People are aware of that problem, and new waves of carbon cowboys will always exist. But I think the higher quality ones will be the ones who win out.
Listen, thank you so much, Diala. I would like you to follow up on all of that and share as well your recommendations, because what we are, from the perspective is we understand that there is an awareness. The general public, citizens around the world, are really getting the point that something needs an urgent, actions. Corporations, based on the initiative of the conference of the parties that has been done, promoted, etc., embraced, have had real impact into some private sector companies, some element. So the SDGs as well framework gathering, like the consensus from governments around the world that we need to work by 2030, even if there are very significant gap between, like objective and implementation. So we are seeing some things moving. At the same time, like you raised, we see like a very significant deperdition of what is invested, what is mobilized, and what is really impacted. We are seeing, like there are different frameworks that are, happening at the same time. So it's still shaping, like you say, Ethan. It's still, underway. A good practice are underway, and ultimately, with the transparency related to social media, related to initiatives like ours, we are, putting forward the real actors, the actors that are the stakeholders, really of acting on the ground to make progress a reality. So, what will be your insight and your vision on that, and the recommendation you could formulate?
Yeah, sure. And that's very well actually summarized. And you said a word there that was exactly on my mind. That's transparency. I think there's several things that have come to my mind. I think, first of all, it's very good to recognize the efforts that are happening. For example, just on this panel, there are very, very important changes that are change makers that are that have the right intent. And we do need leadership to be courageous when it comes to negotiating this space, is what I would say. But there's a few things I want to say. The first thing is that we are all complicit in the situation. We are all complicit. Some people like to apportion blame, etc., like what has exactly how Simon described. But the reality is, so long as we are choosing our pension plans, we want blue chip stocks, we want to go on several flights per year. I mean, there is no end to how much we are all complicit in this. And I think that's also the power in that, is recognizing that, therefore, the action also starts with everyone, end user as well as the suppliers. The second thing, which I think is a very big, constraint as well as an opportunity, is to recognize that in parts of the world, such as where Wade is very knowledgeable on, in West Africa, I think one of the realities that we have to acknowledge if we want to achieve traction is that climate change is perceived by a lot of people there, including myself, that it's a second order issue for some. And there's a reality to that, because as long as you have impoverished regions, there is still the belief that it's a second order luxury issue to even worry about. Now, whether that's right or wrong, or morally right or wrong, it's not for me to judge. But what it is, it's a reality that we must face, and that is, I think it actually creates an impetus to say, well, what can we do to also create social impact? If we want to create environmental impact, we need to help with the social impact aspect. For example, access to power, trying to help the middle class come out as much as possible out of poverty. This is where you're going to get more traction, in my opinion, on the long term for the environmental aspects. But so that's, I think, like a critical humanistic need that we need to address. The last thing, which I think is something that we can do, is really tangible, is to create more visibility around the social impact model. When we pitch any investment, we are implored to always be accountable for the returns that we project. I don't see that level of scrutiny being done with social enterprise models, if I'm honest. And it's a real shame. If you look at places like West Africa, Angola, they have had production of oil since maybe 1960s. Wade will probably correct me on that number, on that year. But with all of that injection and all of that GDP growth, how much infrastructure development has there really been? I can't answer that question for you, but I suspect it's not as near as what monetarily should have been, right? So I think there's a sense of, wouldn't it be great if we started to hold ourselves more accountable for this impact? Let's leave a project. Every place, every community should be better off after an operation than when we first entered it. That should be an absolute non-negotiable. And it's shocking that has not been the way for so many years. And then lastly, I'll just say, in order for us to help that movement happen, encourage visibility, transparency around integrated reporting. It's the best way that we can give light to what's actually happening on the ground, especially in areas of the world where there's not a large degree of enforcement. The public opinion has to speak louder then. That's the only choice we have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Diala. Thank you very much. Simon, I would like to enable you to share a little bit about the concrete solutions that you have, explored, and initiative that you are, currently, advocating. And I look forward, after this session, to potential, continuation of dialogue, because you are based in Asia. Wade and Isan, are doing amazing job, in Africa and Latin America. And there is potentially a bridge there. That's my role. My role is to encourage the stakeholders to make the change happen. So this is why CGF is happening. And I feel there is a little bit of a partnership potential in that discussion, with the blessing, of course, of Diala, our expert of the panel.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think what Diala said is interesting in terms of we are all complicit, right? And I mean, the sad reality is that it's just true, right? Nobody, I mean, I'm sitting here in a hotel that I flew to give a talk about regeneration and governance tomorrow, drinking from a plastic bottle, so we are all complicit. But what's problematic with that reality is that the way we've defined sustainability for companies, right, over the last 40 years has really been about a production footprint. And it's only been about doing less bad, right? And so everything focuses on reducing the footprint. And this is extremely important. But if you are not a company that makes things, moves things, or minds things, then that narrative has nothing to do with you. And this is really, I think, where the big error has been of the sustainability movement. If you look at Europe, if you look at the US, if you look at Singapore, where I live and work, between 70 and 80% of people employed, between 70 and 80% of companies have nothing to do with this narrative. If you work in law, in digital, in marketing, in advertising, in healthcare, for government, for whatever it is, most people do working in services, they have nothing to do with the sustainability narrative that has been jammed down our throats for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Why? Because they simply don't have anything to do with it. They can't. What is their footprint that they're going to reduce? It's either non-existent, it's negligible, or it's completely outside of their power. And as a consequence, what happens is that all of these companies, by and large, have done virtually zilch because they have not been in the public eye. Everyone focuses on energy and oil and maybe steel and cement, which are the big polluters. That is true. But it's not relevant because we are all complicit. We are all benefactors of the services that they create. So I think really what needs to happen is this shift from footprint to handprint. And it's not the reason why we named my company Handprint, but it is really, it is very important, right? This idea of we have to start thinking about companies not as simply being actors that are destroying the world and that are trying to do less of that, but as actors that can do amazing things in the world, that can grow a positive impact. That's the meaning of Handprint. And then figure out how do we make that valuable? Because it remains, of course, if it doesn't work within the capitalist system, it's not going to work. And people are stupid, by and large, right? And selfish and all of those things. And as a consequence, what Diala said in the beginning, we're on the 3.5 degree trajectory. I mean, that's the sad reality. So we need to find a way to make doing good profitable, right? And this is really, I think, what my company Handprint Tech is trying to focus on is how do we change the customer relationship? How do we change the transaction between stakeholders? How do we make every credit card payment something that does good for the world, right? These are the kind of solutions that could massively scale, that are quite easily implemented, could be very cost effective, empower everyone. And what I like about that is that when you look at the story of a footprint, it's a story of limits, it's a story of environmental guilt, and it's a story potentially of buying indulgences in the form of carbon credits, right? If you look at the narrative of Handprint, it's a story of abundance and hope, because everyone can do something good, and there's no limits, right? It's not about, we have to become net zero and carbon neutral. I mean, Jonathan, I know you're based in Switzerland. Even the Swiss don't get excited about neutrality, and especially in this day and age. You can't be neutral anymore. As Desmond Tutu said, if you're neutral in the face of adversity, you side with the oppressor. Neutrality cannot be the goal. We have to aim to go, like World Economic Forum has been saying, like nature positive, planet positive, earth positive. This is what we need to do, and companies need to take and there will be companies taking the lead in this. But I think really this is a narrative that is much more aspirational and that motivates people more. Because from social psychology, we know that if we want to shock people into action, making them feel guilty is extremely effective, right? And this is very powerful. If you want to make, I have a young kid. If you want to make him do something, you can make him feel guilty and he will do something. But if you want to create sustained action over time, making people feel guilty backfires, because people don't want to feel guilty all the time. And as a consequence, what happens is that they zone out, they check out, they stop following, and they say, oh, I can't do anything about this anymore. Right? And that's that's human nature. So the whole concept that has kind of dominated how we talk about sustainability over the last 40 years needs to be changed. And this is very difficult. We can't do this on our own. Hopefully, with the help of networks and people like you, I think this is really what we should be doing, because we need a much more aspirational goal and an aspirational story in order to get not just the hundreds of people that are here today on board, but all of the silent voices that we don't hear and that are kind of checking out. These are the ones that need to start moving for us to have a chance to stay within the 1.5 degree goal.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much. And just to echo what you say, I'm definitely agreeing with the aspect and approach by leading by inspiration. If we want people to be, embracing positive change, it's definitely, inspiration. And when we look at the greatest moment of evolution of humanity, all those moments were, preceding by a moment of inspiration. It was maybe, a theological, it was maybe by artistic, by whatever, different things, but it's inspiration that was enabling us to innovate and reflect and move the society forward. So I agree with you on that. We are getting into the concluding aspect of this very deep and interactive panel. So I will ask each one of you for concluding remarks, a statement that you would like to share with citizens around the planet, our international audience, which is today, before the replay, composed by more than 29 countries and 35 cities on different continents. So please, Diala, what will be your concluding statement?
Really put me on the spot now. I think it would probably be ask for a social impact model and then hold them accountable to it, to deliver it.
That's the consulting in you, like the engineering consulting that speaks in you. But I validate it. I like it. Wade, what will be your concluding message to citizens around the planet? You have to unmute yourself, please.
There we go, unmuted. Look, I think what we need to do is address climate change by utilizing the tools we have, such as carbon credits. We can discuss carbon credits and the methodology behind them, if it's right, it's wrong, or it needs to be revamped, 100%. But it is a tool right now that we can use to affect climate change, but more importantly, like we do in our business models, and as Diala said, we can use it to have significant impact on social development, because it allows us to do things such as subsidize power. I could do a solar project in Africa, but I can't sell power at an attractive rate to communities because they can't afford to buy it. But with the carbon credit addition into the project, I'm not looking at that as an additional profit. I'm looking at it as a way to subsidize, to make power more affordable. And especially in today's world with the high fuel costs we're seeing, I just don't know how people can afford to buy diesel fuel to run their generator so they can have power in their homes at nighttime. I'm heading back to Africa. I was just in Africa last week at a conference in Cape Town, back in the US now, and I'm heading back to Africa next week to Tanzania and Burundi. And I'm really going to take a hard look to see, what people are doing. In my opinion, they can't afford it. So I honestly think there's probably significantly more people, millions and millions of people on the continent of Africa without power, without light right now because of the cost of fuel. So we need to really focus on some type of renewables, battery storage, but utilizing and developing the carbon credits to help subsidize, to make everything more affordable for these developing communities.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you very much. Ihsan, what will be your concluding remarks?
Well, using Wade's comment as a springboard, something like a carbon credit world or renewable energy credits, they are enablers. You need financial mechanisms to affect change, especially if you're affecting change in a world like Africa. And if that is going to be followed through with more action and wave of change, you need just very robust accountability and an ability to continue to measure things going forward. We've had general accounting standards for centuries, ever since Pacioli invented double entry accounting in Italy 500 years ago. But we don't have enough of that kind of thinking around what are we measuring in this sustainability, energy transition, call it what you will, these various spaces. There are some very robust efforts. They are fairly international, such as the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, SASB. And at some point in a world when, 20 years from now, maybe we'll open up financial statements, and simply looking at that financial statement, it will have baked in what has happened to make sure that supply chains are greener, that there's transitional action to cleaner energy throughout a business's activity, and that they actually understand what their carbon footprint is and what's been done to defease it, and that will show up in their accounting numbers. So absolute transparency and accountability is where we need to go, and innovation in a space like carbon credits is a big tool in the toolbox to get there. But I'm not going to stand up and say it's the only tool. It's something that I look to see to be as successful as it can, because it has had an interesting run for the last 25 years, and I think it's got more room to run yet.
Ihsan, thank you very much, and we will conclude with Simon. Simon, what will be your message for our audience and the citizens of the world?
Yeah, I'd say I just really quickly want to build on what Ethan said. I think it's really interesting. I've been toying with this idea of environmental goodwill for a while. Like, how do we put environmental conservation and protection on the books? I think this is something that accounting should be focused on, and carbon credits could be part of that, but I think we need other kind of biodiversity credits as well, conservation, and like just thinking about how do we value nature in a way that actually makes sense for companies. And what I'd say for generally to citizens is that we're talking a lot about carbon, and of course that comes with specific types of solutions, carbon capture and storage, reforestation, but I think what we need to do is find what you're passionate about. Like, there are a lot of problems in the world. What is it that you're interested in this kind of space? It doesn't need to be reforestation. You can be really keen on like coral reef reconstruction, or biodiverse habitat protection, or ocean plastic cleanup, or there are loads of different things, or education projects, right? And female empowerment, lots of things in the Sustainable Development Goals where we need to do work. And so find what you're passionate about, and potentially as a company finds what aligns with your purpose, what your customers are motivated by. And if you want to do something about this, it's actually quite simple. Figure out what is your most important metric, your most important KPI that defines your growth as a company, that defines your success. and publicly commit to connecting that growth KPI to doing good. Yeah? Plant a tree per sale, remove a kilo of plastic per 100,000 views on YouTube or per 150 likes on Facebook. Whatever your KPI is that defines your growth, that defines your success as an organization, if you tie that to doing something good, you can grow with the planet.
Thank you, Simon. I think there is a consensus that we like your concluding remarks. Thank you, everyone. I think we have, had the chance to really have a very holistic discussion about that issue, and we can see that things are moving. We just need to understand that they have to move faster, and that they have to move in a way which is more transparent and available, I would say, for everyone, every stakeholders, to bring their stone to the edification of sustainability, because that is, as we have said, our common legacy. There will be no winner or loser. We will be all losers or all winners. There will be no difference versus, the challenges that global warming is bringing, to our future. So, thank you, everyone. Always, a challenging subject, but I think we are ending it on a positive note. We see that things are moving. We see stakeholders acting. We see researchers and engineers and consultants really bringing their momentum to the challenge. So I thank you for your passion, and this concludes the last session of CGF 2022, and I will join all of you now in a few seconds for the concluding remarks of the overall session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.